Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome back to the Aspire podcast. I'm Shipp, Executive Director of I Have the Right To, and I'm here with my co-host and our co-founder, Chessy Prout. Aspire was created by the nonprofit I Have the Right To as a safe space for honest, meaningful conversations about survivor advocacy, prevention, and what it truly takes to create safer communities. If these conversations resonate with you and you're interested in bringing them into your school or community, we'd love to connect. I Have the Right To partners with K-12 schools, colleges, and universities to provide age-appropriate programming for students, educators, and parents on consent, healthy relationships, digital safety, leadership, and more, helping turn these conversations into action. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetherightto.org. Before we jump into our conversation with today's guest, we want to take a moment to introduce our guest co-host. Chessy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Jonas and Maria.
Hi, everybody. We're so excited to welcome Maria, our communications director, and Jonas, a student intern from the University of Delaware. Maria is incredible. She leads our outreach and storytelling, helping share our mission far and wide. Jonas joined because he's passionate about helping students know their rights and feel supported, drawn to our focus on education and conversation, not just responding after harm. Welcome, Maria and Jonas.
Hi, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
We are thrilled to welcome Leora Tanenbaum, author of 6 books and a leading voice on slut-shaming, sexual agency, and young women's rights. Her latest book, Selfie Nation, draws on 6 years of research to explore how young people navigate today's toxic, sexist culture. Leora's work has appeared in the New York Times, Teen Vogue, 17, and more, and she's been featured on Oprah, The Today Show, NPR, and MSNBC. Leora, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Chessy. I am so happy to be here.
And like I mentioned before the recording started, I am extremely excited to be able to speak with you today because I poured through your book this summer and found myself back in my college days of writing in the margins and coming up with endless questions to talk to you about the work and research that you've done. I want to take a step back, though, for a minute to start for our listeners. You've been writing about girls and women's lives for decades, long before terms like slut-shaming were mainstream. Looking back, what pushed you to focus on these issues and these terms and these topics, and what keeps you in it now?
Yeah, so believe it or not, I have been researching and writing about and tracking slut shaming for 30 years. Since the mid-1990s, before we had a language to even describe this phenomenon. So what happened was in 1993, there was an article in the New York Times about a report that had just come out from the AAUW, American Association of University Women, on sexual harassment in middle school and high schools in the United States. And when I read that article, of course, this was back when everything was in print only, 1993, I had that proverbial light bulb over the head moment because the article repeated a statistic that was in the AAUW report, finding that 42% of girls nationwide in grades 8 through 11 had been victimized by peer-to-peer verbal sexual harassment. Now, it may be hard to believe, but back then, the term sexual harassment was not widely used and was not widely understood. In fact, it had only been coined a few years before that and in a legal context. So even just seeing this talked about that way was really eye-opening. And like most people, probably nearly everybody, to think of sexual harassment as verbal and peer to peer, those were really novel things at the time and not the way people who even thought about it at all would have thought about sexual harassment. So it was thrilling for me on an intellectual level to see that in print. And why? Because I had a reputation in ninth grade as a slut, and I understood peer to peer verbal sexual harassment as being about what I had experienced, even though I didn't have the language or tools to make sense of it. But all of a sudden, I had words that made sense. And not only that, 42%. Whoa, that's 2 out of 5 girls. So I not only all of a sudden had some words I could use, but I also understood that what I had experienced is experienced by 2 out of 5 girls and that I wasn't alone. That was a tremendous transformative moment for me. And what I decided to do is go and find some of these other girls who, and or now women who had experienced the same thing so that I could talk to them and find out if their experiences were similar to my experiences. So that set off more than 30 years of research and reaching out to people of all ages, in fact, about having been victimized by peer-to-peer verbal sexual harassment. Um, and after I had interviewed 50 girls and women who were willing to go on the record for me, and they ended up being between the ages of 14 and 66. These were interviews that I conducted throughout the mid-1990s. I ended up writing a series of magazine articles that appeared in a number of places, including 17 magazine. In fact, my article in 17 was on the cover of the January 1997 issue. So this goes way back. And then it ended up becoming my first book, which came out in 1999, called Slut: Growing Up Female with a Bad Reputation. And in that book, I coined a term, slut bashing, which then a few years later morphed into slut shaming. When I used that term and when I coined that term, I was talking about a very specific experience, which was girls in middle school or high school who were targeted by their peers for basically the so-called sin of being too sexual, whatever that means. Obviously, we know that's so subjective and fluid and often nonsensical, but that's how they were judged by their peers and were policed and shamed and mistreated verbally and physically. And so the book, explored why particular girls were targeted and the ways in which they were targeted and victimized and how they coped with it. And because I went up to the age of 66, that included women who were reminiscing about their experience sometimes decades before with slut bashing. When the book came out in 1999, I was optimistic that things would get better. This was before really the cusp of the revolution of digital culture and before we had smartphones and social media. In 1999, actually, literally like 2 or 3 weeks after my book came out, there was an important United States Supreme Court decision about sexual harassment in schools that held school districts liable if they knew about sexual harassment and did nothing to prevent it. And I thought, wow, this is a watershed moment. Things are going to get better. Oh my goodness, I'm so happy and excited. And cut to today, because of a variety of factors. And we could, probably go on for hours figuring out all the different threads here, but I will focus specifically on the rise of digital culture and social media. Things have just gotten worse and worse and worse from that time until today. So just really briefly, I did update my research. In 2015, I had a book called I Am Not a Slut, Slut Shaming in the Age of the Internet. And, that's when I discovered after talking to a new round of interviewees that everyday slut shaming had become dramatically and horrifyingly worse. And that as digital culture had blossomed, slut shaming became even more pernicious and inescapable as name calling traveled from MySpace to Facebook to Yik Yak and all the things in 2015. Um, Back in the 90s, when girls would come to me and say, this is terrible. People are mistreating me. They're throwing things at me. There's graffiti about me. There are slam books about me. People are telling me drink bleach and die. And then, of course, there was lots of physical, including sexual assault that girls told me about. But back then, I could say to girls, have you considered transferring to another school? As a last resort, because in the 90s, you could transfer to another school and get a new start, and your reputation and the stories about you would not necessarily follow you because you would be in a new community, new group of people. I know it's hard to even contemplate that now. But now, of course, that's not really possible because there's really no place you can travel where things won't follow you. And that's part of the reason that things are so much worse now. You can't go home, go to your room, close the door, and have that kind of zone of privacy. None of us have that zone of privacy anymore. And so slut shaming is just so much horrifyingly worse today. And then, of course, jump to most recently, sexualized deepfakes and what's in the news right now with the sexualized images that are produced by Grok and all the ways that one can, quote unquote, nudify somebody without their consent. And now it's so much easier than ever before. You don't even need the apps anymore to do it. It just goes to show you the strength of slut shaming, how it's so much embedded in our culture. And, things where I was so optimistic, I do not have that optimism anymore. But I also do have the optimism of people coming together and challenging it.
This is incredible and so thought-provoking and is always a good reminder to reflect on what this landscape looked like in the past and where we are now, because, there are so many people and these are universal experiences that know no time or different space, but they have changed over the years because of the different technological advances, the change in our culture, the change in the way that our leaders act towards women and speak about women, which I think has made it feel more okay to harass women on the internet or in person. But I did want to draw a quick highlight to a term that you define in your book, sexual citizenship. I found that term so fascinating, and you write that sexual citizenship is a people's understanding of their own right to determine if, when, and how sexual encounters occur, and others' equivalent right. And I feel like that is a term that we all need to become familiar with and is also very much not a part of our internet culture. The internet makes it so that everybody is open to, and now with AI, your body isn't even your own online. There's a great documentary that talks about a woman's experience with deepfakes, and they say in that documentary that all you need is 135 photos of a person to be able to create a deepfake of them using AI. It's terrifying. But what do you see in the advocacy space that you're in, or the spaces that you live and exist in, that make you hopeful for sort of anything, really, when it comes to how horrific it feels to be a human being on the internet these days?
Yeah, I do want to just quickly, before I answer your question, give a shout out to those who coined and popularized the term sexual citizenship because it was not I. So I want to make sure the credit goes where it is due. And it goes to a group of researchers at Columbia University who did a groundbreaking study called the Shift study. So I just want to make sure that folks listening know that, and they should definitely pick up. There's a book about that research. So, and it's really eye-opening and an important book. To answer your question, so there's so many different ways that girls, women, and non-binary people are sexualized against our will. That there are, as a result, many different places and ways where we can fight back. So, we did talk about briefly sexualized deepfakes, but there are other things that affect so many of us. A lot of girls and young people told me about gender dress codes in their schools and how that was a site of being sexualized against their will. I'm going to assume that most listeners are familiar with this, but in case you're not, or you just need a reminder or a refresher, 92% of public schools in the United States have a dress code. Many of those dress codes are gendered. And what I mean by that is that there are different rules depending on your gender. And most of the time, those rules are meant to create a situation where only girls have to cover up their bodies because they are told by school administrators that if they reveal certain body parts, they will be distracting to the boys. And some dress codes actually have that exact language. You cannot wear XYZ because otherwise you are a distraction. And some of those rules, it varies by school and by district, but many schools have something called the fingertip rule, which means that when you're standing up, the place on your leg where your fingertips fall have to be. I'm like getting it all messed up, but basically your skirt or your shorts have to be longer than where your fingertips fall. So that's called the fingertip rule. And then lots of schools, have rules saying you can't wear spaghetti straps, you can't show your shoulders, you can't show your stomach with a crop top. If you're going to wear tight pants or leggings, then you cannot also wear a tight top, or you have to wear a long, loose tunic top, which nobody wants to wear. So rules like that sexualize girls because it means that teachers and administrators are looking you up and down and evaluating you, often at ages where you might not be thinking of your body or yourself or your identity in a sexual way at all. And so what that does is it forces you to think of yourself as a sexual being, even if you're not developmentally, cognitively, emotionally ready to do that. And even if you are, ick, yuck. And it also suggests that if you're a girl, you have a body that is a problem, and this is a problem that needs to be solved. And it really has a deep psychological toll. I am going to get to answering your question, Chessy, but I just wanted to give the context. When I am hopeful, I'm hopeful especially around this area of non-consensual sexualization because so many students across gender have been doing amazing things to fight back and to raise awareness about gendered dress codes. And in the book, Sexy Selfie Nation, I do share the actions of many students, boys too. It's not just a girl thing. And those who are non-binary as well. This has really been an issue over the last 10 years or so that has galvanized, I would say, a whole generation of students who recognize that it's sexist. It's also racist. The National Women's Law Center has data showing that it is primarily girls of color who get called out and policed over this. White girls get called out too, but it is primarily girls of color. And so I think it's exciting to see this generation of students standing up to their school districts and saying, hey, wait a minute. We understand that maybe you think you have good intentions here, because I always like to assume good faith in the beginning. And I think a lot of students do too, which is great. Like maybe you thought this was a good idea because you thought it would get us to learn better or whatever. But no, actually, that's not what's happening. In fact, the opposite of what you think is happening is happening. So that's where I have most of my optimism on young people who are taking action and often with really good results. Yeah, a lot of school districts have rewritten their dress codes as a result of student activism. It's a great thing to see and to be part of.
Yeah, so I want to hop back to your research for one moment. So you distinguish between targeted harassment and more casual, everyday slut shaming. How can parents, educators, and even peers recognize the difference and interrupt both in real time?
Yeah, I love that question. And I I have an answer that is deceptively simple. It's not that simple, but it's going to seem simple, which is mind your language. Be super, super intentional and careful about the words you use, whether you are a parent or educator or if you're a classmate. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I mean, this is so basic, yet so important. Never use words like slut, hoe, thought. For those not familiar with thought, it's an acronym for that hoe over there. There's so many other synonyms, freak, ratchet, depending on what community you're in, it might be a different term. Don't use it. Don't use that language. Don't use it as a joke. Don't use it with humor. Don't use it in a lighthearted, teasing way. Don't use it to describe yourself. Don't use it to describe your bestie. Even if you think your friend likes it and approves and is in on the joke, and she might be at that moment, still don't use it because she might not feel that way later. It might not land the way you think it's landing. And what it does is it normalizes and legitimates this whole mindset that it's okay to label some people as sluts and hoes and other people are not sluts and hoes. Those categories are so harmful. So the first thing I would say to answer your question is mind your language. Never use those terms. By the way, I do want to add, I'm not a fan of being a language police officer. I don't like to be the language police. And I would ask folks listening to this podcast to not think of it that way. It's more going back to what Chessy was talking about being a good citizen, right? I mean, we all know that there are certain words that are just so hurtful that we don't use them because we inflict hurt on people. We don't want to do that. And so we all know to avoid using certain words for that reason, to be kind, respectful people. I am arguing that words like slut and hoe should just be added to that list of words and that we should avoid them uh, categorically and universally and at all times.
Yeah, so those are great like preventative measures that people can do to stop the judgment from occurring. But when a girl or woman does experience harassment, does experience shaming, how can boys and men be effective allies, and what does a supportive response sound like compared to a more dismissive one?
The most important thing to say is, I believe you. I think those are the best words. If you want to be an ally and you want to support somebody, say, I believe you. I'm here for you. Never say, what were you wearing? What were you thinking? And a lot of people, again, I always assume good faith. I assume good intentions. You may have really good intentions and think you're being an ally and believe it's allyship to say something like, "Oh, that's terrible that that happened to you, and I believe you, but should you have been wearing that?" Don't say the "should you have been wearing that" part. Just and if you're unsure and you wanna be an ally, just use fewer words. "I'm here for you. I believe you." Um, if you need to vent, if you need to cry, if you need help writing a letter to report this, if you need somebody by your side, if you're going to report this, um, I'm here for you. I think I think that is the most powerful thing you can do as a male ally. I will also say, um, going back to the fact that so many students in schools across the United States in the last few years have been challenging their school dress codes. A lot of boys have gotten involved in this in amazing ways, sometimes using a lot of humor. Uh, Sometimes these stories hit the news because this happens every once in a while where there will be boys in a high school who will all strategically and collectively show up wearing skirts, short skirts, as a kind of humorous way to call attention to the unfairness of gender dress codes. And I love tactics like that. They're funny, they're fun. It's a way to get people involved without, again, like being that police officer person that nobody wants to be and I don't want anybody to be, but it's still a way to raise awareness. And anytime you can bring in humor about something so serious, I think that's a win.
I'd love to talk about it from the parent perspective as well. Parents of girls, but also parents of boys. And, it can be a scary time for parents when their children are maybe starting to dress in a different way, their bodies are changing, they're getting attention that, they didn't get before. And especially, for moms who remember what it was like at that age, right? Like I remember, I've said this before, but I remember the first time somebody catcalled me from a car, and I was pretty young and I did not understand, why they were yelling at me. And then it became something that happened more and more often. And so how can parents sort of deal with sort of their own fears that their kids are going to go through what they went through and not slut shame, right? Like I think some people think, oh, I'm going to tell my daughter not to wear the short shorts because that's what's going to protect them. And then on the flip side, for boys who are starting maybe to pay attention to the opposite sex in a different way, how can we explain to them sort of what is appropriate and not appropriate behavior, and what they might see their peers doing that's not okay. So I know that's a really loaded question, but just in general, like what can parents do, and why is it really important for them not to slut shame, and how that actually can really hurt their child's self-worth if they do that. So I know that's a lot to unwrap.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to try to break it down into the question into its various components. So it's interesting, Katie, because the reason I did this most recent round of research that led to Sexy Selfie Nation is that I kept getting these panicked messages from parents who were really freaking out over the way their daughters were dressing, and also the images that they were posting on their social, like a lot of bikini selfies. And I would get these panicked messages saying, "Hey, Leora, you're a slut shaming expert. So I need you to help me because I do not want to slut shame my daughter. But between you and me, she kind of looks like a slut. I would never say that to her. But I don't want her dressing this way. I want her to take down those bikini pics. And I want to do it in a way where I don't slut shame her. Tell me what I should say and what I should do. Like, what are the magic words so that I can be that mom who's feminist, but who also is protecting my daughter?" And I just got so many of these messages. And I didn't know how to respond because they were approaching this from a slut shaming mindset, even though their intentions were good. They want to protect their daughter. I'm a parent too. I have a lot of empathy for that protective impulse. And I didn't know what the answer was. And I realized the only way I was going to figure out an answer that would be helpful to anybody was if I went and spoke to their daughters. So that's what led me to I ultimately spent 6 years and created a safe space and ended up speaking with over 60 young people, ages 14 to 30. And it's because of their sharing with me their experiences with non-consensual sexualization through gendered school dress codes, through image-based sexual abuse, such as the sexualized deepfakes we were just talking about, and as a result of victim blaming if they were harassed or assaulted. And this is what they live with every day. I call these 3 pillars of non-consensual sexualization. It made me realize that they and their parents were just like talking past each other. And what the parents wanted was and were expecting, and the way even the way the eyes, like the way their parents were looking and viewing their daughters was so radically different from the way the daughters thought they were presenting themselves to the world. And I realized that I had to do something kind of as an intergenerational or cross-generational translator. Like, I had to go back to the parents and say, hey, you're approaching this so wrong. Like, this is so backward because your daughters are not the problem. What they're wearing is not the problem. Their photos on their social, those are not the problem. The problem is this non-consensual sexualization that they're living with and that they are reacting against, and they're making decisions as a reaction to their environment. And try to get parents to see it that way. But then I had also to explain to many of the daughters, hey, your parents really mean the best, and they're not trying to slut shame you, even though it sounds that way to you. And also, while you should be able to wear anything you want, and I believe that with all of my heart, you also do kind of need to meet your parents where they are sometimes, and you need to have some compromise here. But both parties need to meet each other and compromise. It's not just the daughters meeting the demands of their parents. I think both sides need to give a little bit. And so that was ultimately what this project was about. Sorry for the long-winded context, Katie, but essentially I want parents and educators to see the world through the eyes of young people, especially young women, and anybody who presents as feminine, because I think a lot of parents and educators and everybody of my generation, I'm in my 50s, we didn't grow up with this kind of environment. And I think for many of us, we don't necessarily see things from the same lens, through the same prism. And it's an education effort. And so if a parent believes their daughter, quote unquote, looks like a slut, don't ever say you look like a slut. Don't do it. Because if you do that, you are perpetuating this mindset of slut shaming. You are dehumanizing the young person in your life. You are reducing her to a sexual object, even though, again, that may not be your intention. Do not say you cannot go out looking like that. Do not say you need to delete that post. Do not say you look like you're asking for it. Do not say you're too busty, you're too curvy, you're too fat, you're too whatever to wear that outfit. What you're doing is you are creating a sense of shame, and shame that perhaps might never have grown, and who wants to be responsible as a parent for that? And more importantly, and I know listeners of this podcast know this, but it's always good to be reminded, when you tell people that it's their fault for being victimized, you are protecting predators, right? And so a lot of parents and educators, they either don't know that or they forget that, but the script needs to be flipped. And instead of telling young people that they're doing things wrong and there's something wrong with their appearance and there's something wrong with their selfies, we need to totally flip it around and look at why they are being sexualized against their will. So it's just a total paradigm shift. But I am hopeful that we can educate people. And it when people hear this for the first time, it does make sense to them. And so I think it's really just an education and raising awareness project, which is one of the great things about your organization that I love so much.
I love that you brought up the selfie part of the title of your book because I grew up in Florida for middle school, and we were at the beach a lot. We would do photo shoots on the beach with our cell phones. Um, and we'd be in bikinis and we'd want to post those pictures on Instagram. I was maybe 13 years old. I posted a picture on Instagram of myself and my little sister at the beach. I loved the beach, loved the water, loved the photo. I put a one of those like filters on it and made it look all sepia-y. And I was really excited about that and got, comments, likes from my friends. Now, when I came forward as a survivor of sexual assault to the police and reported my assault, and it became public, people on the internet found my name, and there are websites that exist to dox private and public victims of sexual assault. And that photo of me and my then 6-year-old little sister in bathing suits was posted on the doxing website. And in that instance, first, it's a complete violation. I had a private Instagram account, which meant that it was somebody I knew who had shared that photo of me, which was a huge violation of trust. But I didn't find anything inherently bad about that photo. I didn't know why. Well, I knew why logically trolls could choose a photo of me in a bathing suit to continue to slut shame me because, the caption of that doxing article was the St. Paul school slut. But I had that sort of sense of self to be like, well, that's not fair. Also, I was 13 years old in that photo. That is completely inappropriate to hypersexualize a 13-year-old and then 15-year-old victim of rape. So that sort of instance of slut shaming didn't hit me as a human with my lived experiences. What did hit me, though, and what I'm still working through today, is the shame and blame that I put on myself for leaving my dorm that night, for meeting up with a boy that I, all in all, did not know very well. And, I've come to I know that, my assault was not my fault. That this young man had been planning this for months, and that I was not the only one that he had done this to. But you see, I'm already qualifying the assault in the first place, that I have to qualify his premeditation to even make my assault legit. There's so much of a connection between slut shaming and victim blaming that doesn't just exist in the external world towards a victim or survivor, but inside ourselves. It can be such a huge presence. Now, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your experience working with these parents and these youths and the people that you interviewed, and what their reasoning was behind having those concerns about their children and the way they were presenting themselves. Because it kind of feels like a parent's concern about their child's body image and the way that they express themselves can be because they're concerned for them, that they want them to be safe. There's an illusion of control, that if I do everything right as a parent, if I, protect my child to the best extent that I can, then nothing will happen to them. But that's just not true.
Chessy, just to repeat what I know you know, but it's important to hear. You didn't deserve that, and it's not your fault.
Thank you.
Uh, yeah, this belief that if you cover up, you're safer. It's such a popular way of thinking. It's the dominant way of thinking, but it is absolutely wrong. And I know it's counterintuitive, but it actually makes girls less safe to tell them to cover up. Because if you, first of all, there is no evidence, no data showing a connection between sexual assault and what you're wearing. You can be completely covered up and be sexually assaulted. Women who are members, for example, of religious, conservative communities get sexually assaulted. The community I grew up in and I'm most familiar with is Orthodox Judaism. Guess what? Very religious Orthodox Jewish women who cover up their entire body and their hair, they get sexually assaulted. The most recent data we have on that particular community is that 26% of married religious Orthodox Jewish women have been sexually assaulted, and I bet it's much, much higher. Okay? Again, these are women who are always totally covered up. And there's so much other data on other communities as well. Amish, lots of communities like that. We know that there is no connection between what you wear and being at risk. We know that almost all sexual assault is committed by somebody who already knew the victim and who is grooming the victim, and it has nothing to do with what they were wearing. Parents don't always think that way, though. They forget, or they think there's something exceptional about their child. And they genuinely, this is again going back to assuming good faith, which makes it, I think, easier to do the project of raising awareness. It's really about educating people and showing that not only does it not make a difference what your daughter is wearing, but you're making things worse because by perpetuating and reinforcing that logic or lack of logic, you are perpetuating and reinforcing the idea that the victim did something actively to deserve being victimized, and you're taking the emphasis away from the perpetrator. And it just continues that cycle, generation after generation, and we need to interrupt it. 13-year-old girls and women of any age, if they want to wear a bikini on the beach, they should wear a bikini on the beach. If you're naked and you're sexually assaulted, you didn't do anything to deserve to be sexually assaulted. I think that's something that needs to be said. If you are naked and sexually assaulted, you didn't deserve it. And yes, wearing a bikini, wear the bikini. Interestingly, so many of the women I spoke with and the girls I spoke with for this most recent round of research told me that they go out of their way to wear a bikini or to wear clothes that, their parents and teachers may consider quote unquote revealing because they want to show I can do what I want. I'm taking ownership. This is the way I want to appear for myself, and you're not going to take that away from me. And it becomes almost a political or cultural statement. And I think that's great. I love that. We should be able to make that kind of statement, and we should not be sexualized against our will, and we should not be blamed for our appearance. So I love it.
I would be super interested in hearing more about the research that went into your new book, especially because you were just talking about how you began with two different groups of people, the young people and their parents, and they had such different perspectives. Like one is saying, no, we need to cover up and protect, and slut shaming is going to prevent things from happening. And then we have the young people saying, this is my right to do what I want with my body, and I'm going to do it as a protest and because I don't want to be sexualized. So when you realized that was happening, what did you do afterwards? How did that affect the book? How was the whole process of distilling these two very different ideas and then producing what you have now in your book?
Thank you for that question. So I too am a product of my upbringing and environment. And I will concede that when I first started doing the research and speaking with young women, they would say things to me that I actually had a hard time processing at first. And I can get super specific. There were certain words that I just kept hearing again and again from different people. And one of those words was comfortable. I kept hearing, I just want to wear clothes that make me feel comfortable. And I would think, how can what you're wearing be comfortable? Because to me, or at least to me, when I was at the beginning of this, to me, comfortable meant, a soft fabric, like something like fleece or cashmere, or, to me, like I had like a very literal idea of what comfortable clothing meant. And it actually took me a while to realize that that wasn't the way the word comfortable was being used, and that so many young people, when they say, "I wanna just look comfortable," they mean, like, psychically comfortable, like and if that means wearing, something tight, or something cropped, or even heels, they don't mean comfortable in the way that it's, like, comfortable literally. They just mean, like, they feel good about themselves. They feel like they're comfortable because they're taking that ownership and taking control back for themselves. So, in order to get the two generations to speak to each other, sometimes it's just figuring out shared definitions of terms. Because I bet there are a lot of parents and teachers like me who are like, "What are you talking about? Like, that's not comfortable," you know? And they need to really meet the girls and young women where they are and really listen and try to understand and unpack the meanings behind the words they're using. Yeah, the word comfortable, that really threw me for a loop for quite a while, I have to admit.
Yes, and I want to focus more on the young people you're talking about who were like quote unquote sick of being held responsible for others' inability to keep their eyes off their bodies. So for boys and men like myself who are listening to this podcast, what does healthy sexual respect look like, and how can someone appreciate somebody else's appearance without crossing the line into like objectification or treating someone like a sexual object?
Oh, I love that question, Jonas, and I want to pause and recognize that I have empathy and that I know it can be scary sometimes if you want to, for example, compliment somebody on their appearance, but you want to make sure you do it in a respectful way, that you're not accidentally slut shaming or harassing um, through like using terms that could be interpreted differently from the way you're intending to use them. So I have a lot of empathy for that, concern or anxiety. I think there are certain kind of ground rules. um, I would ask, and this is for boys and men, but honestly for people of all genders, I would ask to not ever comment on somebody's appearance unless you know them and are pretty confident that they will accept the compliment the way you're intending to. If you have any doubt and you think that, that it might not land the way you want, don't give the compliment. So I would say that at first. And that probably rules out giving a compliment about appearance to a perfect stranger. And that's sad. And I know that that's sad. But if you want to play it safe, that is probably the best move. On the other hand, we've all had this experience where we are just dying to tell somebody how amazing they look, right? And I don't want to stifle that because that's part of the human experience is if we're excited and we want to share our excitement and we want to make somebody feel good, even if they are a stranger or we don't know them that well. So, okay, so I'm going to bend my rule a little bit. Don't make it about their body ever, ever. Don't make it about their sexuality ever, ever, ever. whenever possible, make it about how they have a great sense of style. You really can't go wrong if you tell somebody they have a great sense of style. And if there's a way to connect it to yourself, that's even better. Like, I wish I could pull off that color, or something like that, where you aren't perceived as objectifying because you're kind of in it also, and you're making that connection between me and you. That is a much better way to go. And if you say it with sincerity, then it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So it really goes back to what I was saying before about being mindful of your language. And look, we all make mistakes. We all say things where we're like, oh my God, that was the worst thing. I shouldn't have said it. It's not what I meant. Apologize. If you realize it. If you don't realize it till much later, just be kind to yourself. We all make mistakes.
Throughout this conversation, we've highlighted the fact that adults see sexy selfies as a victim blaming risk. Like, if you do this, this could be used against you. Cover up, please. And then teens are seeing it as self-expression, as a way of rebelling against the three pillars that we had discussed. I guess that my question is, once again, what can we do to close the gap? What are the most productive questions that adults can ask young people about their online choices, instead of like lecturing them? And how do we navigate the truth that sometimes selfies can be dangerous and deepfakes are a huge risk, and they will continue to become risky as AI develops? How can we empower them and at the same time like educate them so that the choice continues to be about them without putting them in harm's way?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. Selfies are dangerous, but not because people take selfies. They're dangerous because bad people are using them for nefarious, cruel, harmful ends. So I agree with you that selfies are dangerous, but not because, you take a selfie of yourself or I take a selfie of myself. It's because of people who are doing bad things. So in order for parents and educators to be helpful, it's just always remembering that it's not the fault of the victim. And you said it yourself so beautifully, but just always reminding people. And it's so hard when we have grown up with a mindset and certain assumptions and presuppositions of things. It's very hard to unlearn it. And sometimes we need to be reminded again and again and again. And I am just as guilty of that as anybody else. I mean, I think that's part of the human condition. We just need to always be reminded, so that we can unlearn things that cause harm. In terms of how, like in a really specific way, how parents can talk to, or teachers can talk to the young women in their lives, I do have some, language that I can share, but it's also more just like flipping the script in your head about how you're going to approach the issue. And everybody should use the language that's comfortable for them and that's authentic to them. But like one thing a parent can say is, "It makes me happy to see that you like your body and are proud of it. Don't let anybody make you feel ashamed because you have no reason to feel that way." Or if you want to really emphasize that you just do not like what your daughter is wearing, you could say, "The reason I'm uncomfortable with your outfit is that I want people to value you for the kind, thoughtful, and accomplished person you are, not for your body." And so that way, the daughter knows, okay, my parents do love me and they are looking out for me, but they also have respect. Another thing you could say is, "Wow, you look really fantastic. But because of sexism and because of racism, I bet a lot of other people out there aren't going to agree with me. Are you prepared for that? If you walk out this door, can you handle that you might get ugly responses that are sexist and racist? You don't deserve them, but if you're not sure you can handle that today, maybe you should change." Or, it could be something like, are you wearing this because you really want to or because your friends are wearing it and you think you need to wear the same thing they're wearing because you should wear what you want to wear? You do you, but if you think it's because of your friends, before you walk out the door, here's your chance. You have a few minutes you could change. And then really the most important thing that a parent can say is, I disagree with your choice, but I still love you. That's really the most important thing. We're always going to disagree, but we have to remind our children that we love them anyway.
Another thing I always like to say too is like, I'm always on your team, right? So like if somebody says something, like opening up the conversation so that if they do go outside and they wear it and somebody says something, they know we're not going to say, I told you not to wear that. But instead we're going to say, yeah, that's really awful that happened. And it's not your fault that happened. Or even using like when you're watching TV shows or movies where maybe things are said that shouldn't be said, like really unpacking, like, why was it her fault that they said that to her because of what she was wearing? No, it was their fault for saying that and thinking that they're entitled to say that about somebody's body, etc. So this is so helpful to have just different ways of thinking about it. It's so ingrained in us in ways that I don't think we even realize the full extent of. And so to get people to just start thinking about it differently and having those conversations is so important. And your book really helps to explain it to people and to maybe challenge them to see it in a way that's different and that really in the long run will protect our young people more than the way that it used to be. And so it's such an important book, and I hope that everybody listening will go out and get a copy. So we like to end each of our episodes by asking our guests for their own I have the right to statement. So I'd love for you to share it with us and what you hope our listeners take away from it.
Is it okay if I have 3 I have the right to statements?
Yes, I love that.
I have the right to be myself without being called a slut. I have the right to appear and dress in ways that feel comfortable for me without being told I'm asking for it or deserve what I get. I have the right to live without fear that someone will use my image in a sexualized way without my consent.
So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for your insights with us today. Your work helps all of us better understand how young people navigate a world full of conflicting messages about their bodies, consent, and self-expression, and what it truly takes to support them.
I've really appreciated this conversation with you, Leora, and those 3 I have the right to's are still resonating in my head right now. I wanted to personally thank you for taking on such a sticky and complicated topic and for sharing your insight, research, and resources with the world through your book and with our listeners through being on the podcast today.
Not only that, for creating the language that we're using now to describe all of these phenomena. Before your work, nobody used slut shaming or slut bashing, and things that we cannot say and we cannot use in language, they don't exist for a reality. So the fact that you're naming these phenomena, the fact that you're looking at what society is going through right now with the rise of digital platforms, and you're saying, I see it, and I am recognizing it, means that from now on, all of us, young people, older people that didn't have the language before, will be able to recognize and practice better ways of not letting that internalized patriarchal view harm other people by victim blaming. So thank you.
Thank you.
And being a man myself and being a part of this conversation, I've learned that if there's one thing that listeners should really take away today, it should be that everyone has a role to play, boys and men included, in promoting respect, dignity, and equality every day. Even small actions like speaking up against harmful jokes or listening without judgment can really make a difference. Thank you.
And for those listening who want to bring these conversations into your school or community, I Have the Right To partners with K-12 schools, colleges, and universities to provide programming for students, educators, and parents on consent, healthy relationships, digital safety, leadership, and more, turning these important discussions into real change. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetherightto.org. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetherightto.org.